Welcome to the Barefoot Interview. Today, Canberra correspondent Deborah Hawke talks with 80s iconic electro-pop band Pseudo frontman and co-founder Brian Canham. Let's take a listen.
Pseudo Echo just began the national tour last Saturday night at the Corner Hotel in Victoria. So how did the show go? Did you get a good reception?
It was fantastic, thanks. Yeah, really good. We're pretty overwhelmed with the attendance and the response was just really amazing.
So is it a nostalgic audience or are there some younger devotees in the mix now?
Well, yeah, I think, with the sort of overhaul of the lineup and having new product out, we've definitely picked up a new generation, really. Still some of the old diehards, but a good healthy amount of a new following.
Now, my colleague was very excited to hear that you were touring, and he was telling me how much he loves bands from your era because they started out on the pub circuit, and with that experience it made them better performers, and meaning that they sounded as good live as they did on a recording. So did those early days help to develop your showmanship?
Oh, no doubt. Look, I started playing pubs when I was about 16 or 17, I reckon, and, this is all good grounding for a band. And, back in those days, we couldn't rely a great deal on technology to sort of to fake it for your recordings. You had to really be able to do what you did. So I think it was all good grounding. And most bands who got to tour a lot definitely got to hone their skills in the live circuit. Now,
where it is that your voice sounds the same as it did back in the 80s, how have you managed that?
Well, I don't smoke, I don't drink. I don't do anything in excess, I don't think. I've been sort of pretty much actively using it too over that span of time. So, from the 90s, even when I was producing, Chocolate Starfish and things like that, I was constantly singing. I'd do some of the backing vocals, or you're singing to express how something should go or how a melody would go. So I was actively using it a lot still.
Have you got any vocal tips for would-be musicians and singers?
I think the most important thing from developing yourselves as an original artist is to really find your own sound, not try to mimic anybody too much, not get too sort of caught up in the whole singing lesson thing. I mean, some people need more than others, but to be honest, the best lessons are out in the field, out there singing live, listening to your voice, recording it and hearing it back, and, not relying on too much, echo and auto-tune and things like this. Just trying to get the real deal and find your own sound, definitely.
There's been a few lineup changes for the band over the past 30 years, so who makes up the band now?
The band now are Darren Danielson, Ben Grayson and Simon Rayner and myself. Darren Danielson and Ben Grayson are both from the Teleporter era, which is the last album we did. It's about 10 years ago. They're probably the longest running members that have played live the longest with the band. There was a change in circumstance during the way where they both at different times weren't able to continue touring, and then we sort of just landed a couple of the other guys from the earlier lineups. They stuck it out for a while, but it was kind of weird. It sort of ended up the same way it ended up in the 80s. So the good news was that Darren and Ben were both available again to reform with us. So it's fantastic. By far my favourite lineup.
Now, it's the band's 30th anniversary this year. So what's changed about Pseudo Echo in this time, apart from the awesome new wave haircuts?
Yeah, well, not a great deal, to be honest. I mean, I think I like to think we've changed with the times as our appearance and our kind of our attitude. The sound is still very period. It's very 80s and authentic to the 80s. I really pride myself in that production value. No matter who's in the band, I have a very high standard, and I usually do it all myself, get it all hands-on, and make sure everything sounds like it did back then. With the exception of energy, that's the one thing that has developed a lot and come a long way. The spontaneity and the kind of enthusiasm performed for the parts are a lot more sort of aggressive sounding, but in essence it's the same sound.
And where did the band name originate?
It came from a synthesizer operator manual. It was one of the synthesizers that was a prominent part of our sound and still is really. It's on the latest single. It's a synthesizer called an ARP Odyssey. And the sound in particular was called the Pseudo Echo machine, and which simulated an echo unit on the sound. So Tony Lugton, the original keyboard player, was flicking through the manual when we were all sort of throwing around names, and he just read that out. And I think we just said, hey, that's a good name for a band.
Very apt.
Yeah.
And will you be playing any new songs besides your new single, Suddenly Silently?
We will indeed. a couple of brand new songs, and we also have a song from the Teleporter album, which Darren and Ben both were a part of. So it made sense to do one of our faves off that, and we've never really performed anything off that ever before. So it's novel for us and the audience.
It was going to be included on the Teleporter album. Why did you end up waiting to release it now?
Well, all right, that's a good question. Ben Grayson and myself, we wrote the song, and at one point it was definitely going to be a Pseudo Echo song. And we did record it, in fact, to go on Teleporter. But during the making of that, we were still not really sure about, how the lineup, if it was 100% right, and whether the label at the time was 100% right. And we had some reservations, so we kept what we thought was one of the best songs. And we had a new project that we were starting called Origin, and there was a real vibe on that. So we said, look, let's use this song for Origin. And we re-recorded it again for Origin, got a female vocalist involved, and it ended up being a hit with Origin back then, which was, we felt like we made the right decision. But strangely enough, we'd always had this, in the back of our minds about this song just sort of hovering that we nearly did with Pseudo Echo. And, it sounded good when we recorded it back then, but it was a bit dated now, and we needed to find the right sound. And, I think when I rebanded with Darren and Ben, it really all came together. The sound fell in place, and it really made sense to give this song another go.
Which leads well into my next question. For a while there in the 80s, music seemed a little cringeworthy. So do you think the passing of time is casting a more flattering light on the era?
The 80s genre in itself was such a prominent sound. It had such an unquestionable sound of that genre. I mean, every decade has a sound, but the 80s is unmistakable 80s. You can't really confuse it with any other genre, perhaps until most recent times, where there's a lot of mimicry or a lot of throwback to that period. But I think that it's that test of time. There was no doubt a point where you'd sort of cringe at it. But I think what's happened over the time is the music itself has found its place. Rather than the haircuts and the clothes, it's definitely become back to the longevity of certain songs of that period.
How do you think the Australian music industry has changed since 1982?
Well, I think it's definitely got onto a world stage. That's the most thing that I notice about it. Back then there was still a bit of a difference between the local acts and the international acts. It was playing catch-up in the 80s, no doubt, because in the 70s there was quite a substantial difference between local recordings and overseas recordings. In the 80s it was catching up, and I think now there's definitely no difference. It doesn't matter where you make your record. You can make it in the local suburb down the road, or you could make it in LA or, New York, and there's very little difference, if any, at all.
Is this latest tour a result of public demand?
Yeah, definitely. A bit of public demand and a bit of our own internal vibe, I would say, too. I mean, we always have a healthy following on our Facebook page and my personal Facebook page. We have a lot of requests for touring and people sniffing around, but, it all just fell together. When we got the lineup right, the song came together, the sound came together, and we talked about touring and the whole lot.
What's your favourite memory of touring with Pseudo Echo?
I think touring the US was fantastic. It was high-flying times. We did some real big shows. We travelled in style, and, it was all new and exciting.
You were in high school when you jointly started the band. Did you ever imagine this would take you on a journey of this status?
Well, I'd be lying to say I never imagined it. There's no doubt perhaps fantasised about it. It was always in my mind that that's what I wanted to do and wanted to achieve. I don't know if I really realised the severity of a reality factor back then. But, I was fortunate for most of it to go according to plan. It definitely went, beyond my expectations in a way.
Now, back in the 80s, you drew on inspirations such as Simple Minds and Duran Duran, and Suddenly Silently, I must admit, still has that trademark sound. But how have your musical influences changed over the years? What are they now?
Well, strangely enough, now I don't listen to a great deal of current music because I'm either making it myself with bands, and I tend to not want to mimic what's out there because I think by the time you get it out there, it's old. So I tend to really just go with my instincts and what feels right and what feels fresh. But I listen mainly to film scores. I mean, I listen to a lot of classical music of great composers, and I think that's my escapism from my kind of daily routine of producing current, pop music.
So I'm actually reviewing for a Canberra audience. So what's your message to them, for the fans that will be coming to see you?
Well, Canberra's quite exciting for us because we haven't been for so long. It always seems to get scrapped off the tour. And we were insistent on this time to get it in. And, it nearly didn't happen, but we just pursued it and persisted, and it happened at the end there. So it's a great feeling for us to finally have it tacked on the end of the tour and finish up there.
Well, we're glad that you pursued it, and I'm sure you'll be welcomed with open arms. And that's Brian Canham from Pseudo Echo.